W. Bell grew up in Francistown and went to school in the Convail system. He spent nearly 2 decades steeped in the impenetrable world of the defense industry. He has led development efforts in covert projects ranging from the fabled U.S. Army Comanche stealth helicopter to cutting-edge aircraft survivability, is that the right word? Equipment for the Ministry of Defense. He holds high clearance and 3 advanced degrees in aerospace engineering. He's a helicopter pilot and operates drones for the U.S. government. This work on electric warfare systems and countermeasures has sent him across the globe to dozens of countries in undisclosed locations. R.W. Bell never expected he'd write a book until he had to. I love that last line.
It sounds more impressive than I really am.
There's a chat box. It sounds awesomely impressive, actually. Wow. And the whole
I would just remind you that I'm wearing this shirt, so this was from my wife. Just put that in context. Thank you.
Very cool. Okay, so you guys all see the chat box? I put a little link to the Toad books. If you haven't already purchased your book, you can buy them online, or you can come pick them up at a store. We have beautifully signed books. And I think that's really all that we need to do, because he wants to take questions as we go. He's got these slides that we're going to discuss and everything. So I'm going to give it over to Ryan.
Well, thank you all for coming. Are you expecting any others on your side, Tammy?
I don't see anybody else right now. Oh, wait.
If folks,
oh, goodness, look at all this. Couldn't admit
in.
them all. It's like 5 more people.
All right, great.
Ooh.
We'll let everybody kind of settle in here.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for the intro, and thank you everybody for joining. This is my first book signing of maybe any sort. So to do it during COVID and to do it virtual is it's going to be a new experience for all of us. But so thank you again. What I hope to do is keep things to an hour, maybe less, and we can keep sort of an open forum. You guys are welcome to shout out any questions you have as we go. But you know, what I'm going to do here is give you a little bit of a agenda that is going to be sort of a journey for this little discussion. The format of this briefing comes from the teachings of Melissa Marshall, who does TED Talks for engineers and scientists, and she teaches folks how to present their tech, right? She's got a famous TED Talk called Talk Nerdy to Me. And her thing is that, you know, you should have a briefing that's very picture-based.
Connolly?
And the pictures are there to help aid in the story. So you won't see as much text, although I guess I'm an author now, so I did kind of violate that principle with some text, and you're welcome to ask questions about that. But I'm going to take you through a little bit of background on the inspiration. I'm going to take you and give you a little bit of background on the publishing process and how that occurred. And of course, we'll talk a bit about the story. I'll try not to give too many spoilers, but I'll give you a little bit more insight than you may get just from straight reading, and talk a little bit about what's next. And we'll use this sort of analogy of the tower here. This is Anish Kapoor's Orbit Tower. And we'll, through this discussion, we'll climb the tower. And when we get to the top, we'll have the view of what's next. So that's how we'll start into this. So here's the first topic, the inspiration. So a lot of people have asked, you know, why this book, or what was the impetus behind some of the concepts in the story? So I'll give you a few of them. There's a lot of reasons for this book, but the first thing that intrigued me was, you know, I'm very into sci-fi, and you see a lot of sci-fi where there's a microchip and somebody steals the microchip, and then the story is about getting that information someplace. And I always thought it would be fascinating for a main character to discover something that's already in the works. It's not a design that needs to happen, but what if there was a world-changing tech that was already here, and the main character finds out about it, right? And that's the ARCELOR in the story. And then another interesting thing to me was, pop culture has plenty of instances of UFOs, right? And the government conspiracies of developing unidentified flying objects. And I always thought it'd be interesting to ask the question, what if the government actually built an aircraft that just looked like a flying saucer, but it wasn't classified? It was just out there for us to see, and they sort of used it as a police, enforcer. And that's the Sentry that's in the story. If you guys could mute unless you're going to speak, that would be helpful. And then the other thing was, what is this tower you see in this in these pictures, right? The orbit tower is kind of a very British looking structure that probably does what it was intended. It makes you ask a lot of questions. What is this thing when you see it? But it's built in London at the Olympic Stadium. And I spent some time in London, and as this was being built, often wondered what it was. And so it became an intrigue of mine, and it actually ends up being where the climax of the story takes place. And so that was another inspiration element. And then again, that same time period, about 2012, there was and continued to be a lot of discussion about Brexit and the politics behind that. And a lot of people that I spoke to while living over there had a real difficult time explaining the politics even in their own country. So it just became interesting to me to have a story that might explain that with some other, rationale, right? Maybe there's another reason for Brexit that really does make sense, to everybody if there was more known about it. So that's a little bit of the intrigue behind the story, current events. And then another was, who is Ethan Cross, right? Ethan Cross is the main character. And for those of you who have read it, I've gotten some feedback that he's a little bit like Robert Langdon from the Da Vinci Codes. He's got a MacGyver type aptitude to get out of sticky situations. I'm a big Bond fan, so there's certainly some elements of Bond about the story that he may exhibit. Tom Swift is an old series like the Hardy Boys that I read to my son. Jason Bourne, maybe Sherlock Holmes, but really in the end, I think he's his own person, and he's really based on my wife. And my wife is a very fact-based, data-driven engineer. She's a very brilliant engineer. She's got 6 patents in various things, and she's very much private. So she's really the inspiration for Ethan Cross, and his skill set of being a flight control engineer comes from a coworker of mine who's quite skilled in that, and it's sort of that cross between those two things that he's based on. And there was always the thought that maybe he was who my son might be, 20 years from now, and that was something fun as well. So that's a bit about the inspiration. There's another bullet here, the Toadstool and P.J. O'Rourke. P.J. O'Rourke being, famous political satirist, local author. And I'll talk a little bit about that coming up. So just some foreshadowing for a couple slides ahead. make that connection for you. So I'll talk a little bit about the goals here in writing. So those are the inspirations. What are the things I was trying to accomplish? And one of the things that I always scrutinize in sci-fi stories. And again, I'm a big sci-fi fan, from Star Wars, Star Trek, and Marvel stories and whatnot. But I always look for, the link back to real science. And, there's very few sci-fi stories that are very, very much based in real, like, plausible science. And I thought that was really where I wanted to take this, something that was believable and could happen based on technology that is on the cusp of occurring or already exists. So, and another goal of mine was to capture some of my travel experiences. So, my family was always, you heard Tammy say, I've been all over the world. My family was always encouraging me to write a travel log, and my thought was, no one really wants to read a travel log, but it would be interesting to maybe capture some of these experiences. And so there was this thought that became trace element, that maybe I could have a fiction story, take a character through some of the places that I've been. So every place in the book, I'm proud to say, is a place that I have been, and that's another aspect of some of the realism and the feedback that I've got from people about the settings. And then you always see stories where there's a spy or some sort of a FBI agent or something that is the main character, and I was really fascinated by the thought of a regular person being the main character and getting caught up in these kind of things, and I wanted an engineer main character to go through something that was pretty exciting and be a tool to teach my children that engineering is really cool. Although this ends up being very much a daydream of being in long meetings for most of the time. But so I've got this quote at the end of the slide, and I want to explain that a little bit. So Stephen Pressfield, and if you don't know him, he's quite a prolific author. He's wrote many books that have been turned into movies. One of them here is The Legend of Bagger Vance. But he's very much famous for writing books about writing books. And one of the things that stuck with me from a book that he wrote was this line: I did what I myself thought was interesting and left its reception up to the gods, right? So I'll talk a little bit about this coming up, but I wrote a story really for me, and I hope that other people like it. I think the funny thing about Stephen Pressfield is the book that this comes from is a book he calls "No One Wants to Read Your Shit." And sorry, Mom, it's earmuffs. But I have that book, and I think it's funny because I haven't finished it, but I take a lot of quotes from it. So that's maybe some humor that my wife would enjoy. And Ethan Cross too. This mug comes from her as well. Ask me about my book. So we're at the first step on the journey up this tower. Now we're coming up on the second step here. So publishing. So the publishing process was foreign to me, and maybe some of you have a little bit of experience, Tammy, maybe with the Toadstool, but I thought it would be interesting to pause for a moment to talk a little bit about the publishing experience, because it is sort of unique to experience that. And what I learned through this process is that there are like 3 ways to publish, and those being self-publishing and and then there's the traditional publishing through, publishing houses like that of, like Ingram and whatnot. And then there's this method of publishing that I took that's only been really popular in the last 5 years or so, from what I can tell, which is indie publishing, I guess, independent publishing, with entities like the Atmosphere Press out of Texas, who have stood up to sort of help authors get to this state without going through some of the constraints that the other methodologies offer. Just to give you a sense that if you do self-publishing, you're pretty much publishing your manuscripts directly through something like Amazon, and mostly Amazon, right? And you sort of give up the wider circulation to places like the Toadstool, and you have sort of just that monopoly of distribution through that enterprise. And then traditional publishing is just as you might think, you got to shop it around like a movie script. And then this might be a little bit of conspiracy theory, but a couple folks who've gone through this process, whom I trust, put me on alert about this, that normal publishing companies may court you and provide you with a contract for your book with the intention of never publishing it, because they want to take you out of the competition of the books that they've invested their advertising in. I think that may be more prevalent with children's books and whatnot, but it was a fascinating thought. Whereas the Atmosphere and outfits like them give the author full creative license. Right for the end, we were doing edits to add like the table of contents right until days before the release, and changing cover art. So I think that was much more appealing to me in the end to go that route. So how did it unfold for Trace Element? So I wrote the story based on a storyboard that I had invested some time in. And in that way, like, I knew the story before I started writing it. And a lot of people that I've read about who write about writing, like Stephen Pressfield, say that there's, these periods for a writer of writer block and developing, characters and the fog of writing, the process. And I didn't experience that a lot because I had a story I was trying to tell. And certainly, like, I would say half of it was on paper before my son was born. And once he was born, I didn't have that much time to sit and write. And so when I did have time, I was just putting a story that I already knew on paper. So there was that may be a unique approach. I had a character map that sort of developed as a way to help me understand how some of the characters were interrelated. And that sort of bleeds into this next point here, where the term mez and embeam is, if you haven't heard that, like, the visual parallel is sort of like if you're at an old department store and you look in a mirror that's facing another mirror and you see the reflection of yourself over and over again. It's a story within a story. And Hamlet is a famous, example of a mez and embeam, where there's a play within a play and a story within a story. I was fascinated by that thought, and it kind of carried that theme through Trace Element, in that there is a story within the story. So the technology that we talked about in the beginning is sort of like a carrier wave of a plot, and there's sort of modulation on that carrier wave that is the character arc, and is sort of a story within a story. And if you've read it, you'll maybe appreciate that. But so then the publishing process sort of follows a prescription that the Atmosphere helped guide me through, right? And so, I've got a manuscript. it needs to be edited. The first thing I did was send it to Lee Moddard, who's on the call here. And, I kind of wanted a gut check of like, hey, I'm about to put a lot of investment of time into this publishing process. Can you let me know whether this is, any good? Tell it to me straight, man, right? And that was a really enjoyable part of the story because he was the first person that I shared the story with. It was in my head until it, came out, and a lot of good feedback there from an old friend. And I would say that Lee's feedback is probably responsible for what's next, which we'll talk about at the end here. And just to leave you with the thought that, a few weeks after Lee had read the initial manuscript, he called me up and said, I can't stop thinking about what these characters are doing now that the story's over. And that was really feedback that was fun to hear and kind of kept me going on the second part of the story. So developmental editing, after Lee said it's good, I went to Atmosphere's developmental editing crew, and they have a network of editors who read the story first for plot and character development and sort of like the description of settings. Really, the developmental side is getting the story right. And I was hooked up with a gentleman who exclusively reads and edits sci-fi as his career. Does some work for popular science, and his initial feedback to me was really important because he was the first sort of person that I didn't know who read it. And I always like to tell this story because some of the just watching the time, some of the folks that that have read it, I think will appreciate the twist in the story. And this gentleman was the first to encounter that twist, without any allegiance to me. And he said, I read a lot of sci-fi and first-time authors, and many times when I encounter a twist in a story from a first-time author that's sudden or surprising, it's because they didn't set it up well. And so I got to your twist. I was totally unexpected. I went back, read it to the point again, and he said, you set it up great. It was just a really good twist. And he's like, I wouldn't change a thing about that. And that was really great feedback, I thought, to hear from someone at that level. He gave some great constructive criticism in terms of, I want to know more about future London. Describe some things about future London that readers can kind of chew on. He wanted to know more about the main character and his background and aptitudes. So it was really a fascinating part of the process, developmental editing. Copy editing is just as it sounds. It's go through the grammar and the spelling and the syntax. I mean, I'm an engineer, so that was probably a lot of work there. But I will say that I used the artificial intelligence tool to read the script many times and then read it out loud back to me. So it was in pretty good shape at that point. And after that round of editing, it goes to format editing and becomes a book, right? And that's how it gets fit onto the pages. And I'll tell this story before we move to the next chart about the cover art. So Atmosphere, is a entity that really prides themselves on giving the author the final say in the work, right? Creative license. And they do that too with their artists for their cover. So I, as the author, would give something like this image on the side. This was a sample that I created that said, I want the cover to be somewhat like this, kind of James Bondish kind of. And they came back with this. And I said, there are no guns in the story. The title is Trace Element, right? There's some, kind of things that are very different here. Can you put me in touch with the artist? And I'd like to, be very collaborative with the artist. And they said that they wanted their artist to have that same creative license. And I said, well, I'm going to go with someone else. So they were very gracious and let me find another artist. And I went with Josh Allen here, who I know well as a good friend, and does fantastic work for my primary employer, from commercials to artwork to everything. So he was excited to do a novel cover, and I'm going to switch over and show you the progression of his work, from the sketches I gave him to what became the final cover. There's a little bit of music with this too, and it's just a moment of kind of an interesting view on how a cover could develop. So check this out. I think you can still hear me over this, right? So here are some kind of layouts that we did together. I wanted this atom to be encompassed around the characters, and we ended up shadowing out the characters in the end, in this format that you are familiar with. But the prototype of the book came in with that earlier cover, which is, you can see the contours of the faces and whatnot. And so this was a fascinating piece of it too, because we had a release date of 1/20/21, and for a few weeks on Amazon and elsewhere, this book is what showed up in the database that sort of propagated to all of these places. And we went, of course, and changed it. But in the UK, in the UK, at least one copy like this was printed, and a friend of mine sent me. So if anyone has a copy with that cover, I would say that's very rare, and hang on to that one because it was the prototype cover. So I have sent him a proper copy as well. So this is what I wanted to tell you about that P.J. O'Rourke connection, and the Toadstool before we get into about the story. And this is a fascinating connection to the Toadstool to me, and a little bit of a connection to P.J. O'Rourke. Well, a couple years ago, maybe 2017, so we're a little 3 years ago, I wanted to get in touch with P.J. O'Rourke because he had given a really impressive commencement speech at my high school graduation in 1999. So this speech was over 20 years old, and I wanted to get a copy of it for my 20th class reunion. And so we got puppies running around down here. And so I said to the Toadstool, is there a way to get in touch with P.J. O'Rourke? He's notoriously a recluse, and he doesn't have a way to contact him. He has a website, and his publicist has an answering service, and it's sort of a joke that he's very difficult to get in touch with. But he has a relationship with the Toadstool. So I left a message with Willard in Peterborough, and I said, I'd love to get this speech. Well, the commencement came and went, and we didn't hear from him. The reunion came and went, and then it was a few days after the release of Trace Element that P.J. O'Rourke came into the Toadstool and left a hard copy of an original typewritten speech with Willard, who called me and said, "Hey, I've got this manuscript here that P.J. O'Rourke left for you." So I thought that was great, and I'd love to thank him if he's out there. I told Willard that if he sees him again, pass on my thanks. But that was quite the tip of the hat, I thought. So thank you, Toadstool, and thank you again for setting this up. So a bit about the story. Any questions, real quick? We're at the halfway mark, and we're right where I thought we'd be. Any questions? I have another mug. Just be careful what you ask me, because you could end up in my novel.
How do we get our hands on one of those limited edition cover books?
You can fight me for it. That's the only one I know of besides the one that's floating around the UK. That one. I've already lost it. you guys are welcome to speak up, or even just text to Tammy. And Tammy, you're welcome to speak over me. No pride in authorship. Maybe there's a little. So what are we looking at on this chart? Let me make this a little bigger for you. Couple interesting things on the images here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I think the pace of the story is by chapter. And that's what that plot is in the center. And then, of course, the square image there is a map of Europe and where the story takes the main character. So I'll talk a bit about that as well. But something that you might find interesting is for most of the story's life, from like 2012 to about 2019-ish, when the manuscript was more solid, I was calling it Axiom Feint, which I thought was a great title from a literal sense of what happens in the story, like a self-evident twist, right? In some of the discussions with Lee and others, like I didn't want it to sound so sci-fi because it didn't seem consistent with the goal of having a story that was very plausible, and I thought it might give people the wrong impression, right? It seemed a little bit more sci-fi than I was shooting for. So Trace Element, the name came out of the chapters in Monaco that I was writing, and trying to dive into the Atomic Energy Agency's background, and trace element is a term that came out of that research that seemed to fit well. When I started, I wanted to be certain that the book was a closed form story that was, had sort of a beginning that was purposeful, that kind of came back full circle, because I hate stories like, anyone watched the series Lost, and you got invested for years, and then you found out that they probably didn't write that story from cover to end before they started filming it, because it had a very unsatisfying ending. And so my goal here was to make sure that the ending felt very, very closure oriented, and just like old school essay writing, right? Tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them, bring it all back. So I was interested in writing about technology, of course, and the challenge I made to myself was to write a human element to the story, and that modulation of the human story became much more than I anticipated once I started to get into that character map and whatnot. But I will say, and this is where I'll jump over to this plot trace thing, that the early chapters called Valence and ARCELOR are about the Century and the ARCELOR battery that we talked about in the beginning. And they are the first chapters that I wrote. There's really not a lot of content describing much of the character in there. They're very much technology based. And to me, that was the nucleus of the story. There had to be a technology and an application for that technology that the story was anchored around. And I think the interesting thing is that those two chapters, being the first that I wrote, were the two chapters that I spoke most about with that developmental editor, in the context of, even Pressfield says you should have sentences in your story that are only there to advance the plot or the character development. And these two chapters may violate that, in that I go very deep into the technology and the background of these devices. And with the developmental editor, we said, should we cut out some of this? And his feedback was, sort of 50-50. It's not a long novel. It is really a brand of writing that is not out there in the market, and that others probably can't write about in that level of detail. And he said, it's probably good that you keep all that in there, because it really gives your writing style a brand. And I think that's the part of this plot pace that's the lowest and gives a lot of background, and things pick up from there. And if you have finished the book, maybe you agree that there's some immediate excitement, and then the characters kind of get away from that and make their way through, this traverse to the south of France, and then over to Monaco, and it picks up a little bit in Monaco until there's a revelation, and they come back to London, and the ARCELOR middle orbit tower scene is what I consider the climax, where things really come to a head, and then again at the very end, I think there's a epilogue that gives a little bit of intrigue. So that's how I would characterize the pace of the story. So the message is get through those first chapters, and it really picks up. So, and part of those first chapters is designed to be a distraction from what's really happening with the character situation. And just like the character Ethan Cross, the aim was to take the readers on this intrigue of the technology and distract them from the interrelationship of the characters. So you might find that's happening as you read. So another interesting, unique part of the story that I'll mention too is that there's music involved, and you might say, how do you write a story with music involved? And maybe this part of it isn't for everyone, but if you do see on my website, the sort of Easter egg is that the chapter called Dark Machine is written to the pace of a song that's sort of a techno song, but it would be a theme music to a chase scene as it is. And if you start that song at the beginning of that page, you'll find that it paces up with much of the action in that story, which you can, is somewhat hard to do when you're reading, but you're welcome to go to my website and click on the audio file where I've done that work for you. I've played the music with the audio. And I'll just caution you that the audio is narrated by a British woman's voice, which I think the book has to be done with. But it is an artificial intelligence voice, so there are some odd pauses and inflection, but it does a pretty good job. So just a caution there. So any questions on the story? We've got the list of chapters on the side there from the table of contents. Try not to give any spoilers, but I'm not above it. I will say, because this question came up and I saw Rosalie is on. Thank you, Rosalie. So she and I had an exchange. Hiddenite is a real gem. And I just thought the name was very apropos. But by way of spoiler, pay attention to the jewels in the story, and they'll do you well. Was there a question there?
It resembles an emerald. It's like an emerald.
Yes, it's green and it's lithium based, and it's one of the only lithium based gemstones that retain its color. Most other lithium gemstones will fade in the sunlight, but hiddenite is, from what I understand, valuable. So,
if I remember correctly, we were looking at that years ago, and I went to one of the islands. There's also a mine in Pennsylvania that has that.
Yes. Okay. Yep.
Okay.
A friend of mine, Alex Fedora, left our employer and went out to do his own work as a gemstone distributor. And I contacted him about getting a piece, and he said, it's there and it's in Australia where you can get that, or New Zealand. So yeah, very cool. Any other questions?
I'll wait to the end because I don't want to be a spoiler alert either.
Okay. So we're 3/4 of the way through. There's just a couple more topics. So just checking into our tower climb, we're about 3/4 of the way up. So the view from the top of the ARCELOR middle orbit tower, again, very British name, right? Is the topic of what may be next. So we will talk a little bit about this, and I'll end with a portion of the story that Tammy guided me. She said, "You want to come over here, bud? You can sit right here." A portion of the story that is a bit of a read aloud. So yeah, he can stay here. Ethan's here, so you guys will get a little bit of. You want to sit on Dad's lap? Yeah. Come here. You want to bring him over here? So what's next? So there is a follow-on story, and like I said, the story is very episodical, right? So like James Bond, right? Come on in. This is Ethan. He's probably more like me than his mother. So I'm going to read a poem about you that's for you at the end of the briefing. So you guys can put that face with the name. All right. The next installment is really answering the question of what. So I choose my words carefully here so I don't give a spoiler, but if there is a technology that exists, like we saw on the first chart, that is a mystery and sort of a world-changing technology, this book answers what would the people who are in charge of that technology do to keep it secret, right? And if Ethan Cross now knows about it, what measures would they take to keep their secret from the rest of the world? So that's sort of the teaser. This one takes the character from Dubai to the Marshall Islands, to New Zealand, Australia, and in Australia through Sydney, Brisbane, and ends at the Coral Sea. And just like the other, I think its working title is the Coral Sea. That's where the climax will be. But I think, and I'll probably consult with Lee on this one, that the title may become Shadow on the Sun, Ethan Cross and the Mystery of the Coral Sea. So that's that remains to be seen. If this book does well and people are interested, maybe we'll go through and publish this one. But Josh ginned up a prototype cover for me, and this is an electric amphibious jet that's on the cover there, called the Intelligama, which is a Australian lizard that they call the water dragon. So that is Trace Element, the sequel. And the thought is that once you know what what will be done to maintain the secret in Trace Element, maybe a third story would explore what are they really doing with that technology. The bad guys, the villains. So it's part of the storyboard, but again, I wouldn't be satisfied if any of these stories were just left as a cliffhanger. So they all kind of have their own plot and closure to them. So in the end here, I just wanted to bring you to the top of the tower, and what's the view? Where have we been on this briefing? The images on the side here are sort of some of the actual views down of the tower. There's a big tube slide. It's the world's largest tube slide that was installed some years after the tower was built. So it's an attraction. And just a final word on the story, that I knew that I wanted the climax to be on this tower, but I didn't want to write it until I had been there. And the story unfolded where I sort of wrote the first chapters and the last chapters and brought it all together, and there was a hole in the middle. And it was 2019 when I was able to go back to London, and the tower had been finished and the slide had been installed, and I was able to go down it, and I based that experience on based the climax chapter 13, I think, on that experience. So in keeping with having been each place in the story, that's the final part that stitched it together. So these quotes show up in the book. Just an explanation on what do those mean. So trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowances for their doubting too, comes from Rudyard Kipling, and it was sort of a guiding principle for the main character, and has always been sort of a guiding principle for me as well. It's from the poem If, and it's a quote that my grandfather often says, and was his favorite poem that he handed down to me. So kind of baked that in there. And the things you read in chapter 2, chapter 1, I think, about the Gordon's Wine Bar and connection with Rudyard Kipling are all true. Rudyard Kipling used to live above Gordon's Wine Bar, or that in that building, maybe before it was a bar. But interesting connection. And Rudyard Kipling, of course, wrote the Jungle Book. This quote, "Travel is everyone's chance at fame. Stories are our currency," comes from another close friend, Bassam Tarazi, who kind of shares that love of adventure and travel. And he has written a book and gave me some guidance. He went the traditional route. He wrote a book called Borders, Bandits, and Baby Wipes. And his book is his account of taking a small vehicle. The only rules for the Mongol rally is you have to have a small vehicle with an engine that has no more than like 1.3 liters. And you leave from London and you drive across Asia, right? You drive across Mongolia. It's not a race. You get there when you get there. It can take you years. You can never get there. But a bunch of people leave at once, and the ones that make it through are the real champions, sort of a self-driven, adventure of a lifetime, really. So I got that quote from him, and it's something that I baked into the story that one of the characters says at the end. So, and then here's the P.G. O'Rourke inspiration. Get out of town. This is bad advice because the Monadnock region is a great place. It's heaven on earth. He said that at my 1999 commencement, and it just stuck with me because it was true then that, a high school student may not appreciate that, but I was certain to get out of town and experience the world. And lo and behold, I'm back in the area, and I just think that's an interesting connection to the Toadstool. You can listen to this whole speech on my website. I took the liberty of recording it for my classmates, but it's there for others to listen to. I did not publish the text because, I'm not sure, haven't been in touch with PJ, but that is his work, but it's definitely something that resonates with me. So you're welcome to listen to it, but we don't have the manuscript to read. And then again, from Stephen Pressfield's illustrious, no one wants to read your stuff. He recognized that to write a book is very much a narcissistic endeavor, right? You have to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, I've got something to say that I think other people want to hear. But he also countered that with, you do need to, I'll read his quote, right? Give the contribution that only you can give. Creative work is not a selfish act or a bid for attention on the part of the actor. It's a gift to the world and every being in it. Don't cheat us out of your contribution. Give us what you've got. So that stuck with me and was another reason to keep going. So I've been saying this to folks who purchased the book and have written to some of you that I hope Trace Element gives you somewhere to go when you have to stay where you are. And I think that's apropos for the time that we're in these days. another little Easter egg for the engineers in the audience. Underneath the trace element is the equation that the book is based on. So you can guess from that what you're going to learn, but it's not the only twist in the story to find out what the ARCELOR really is. And so with a cue from Tammy, I'll end with a read aloud, which is really not part of the story, but I think embodies some of the impetus for writing. And that's the poem I wrote to Ethan. So you've seen him earlier in the briefing, but I'll give you this poem, and you can think of his little face there as I read through it. But it's called "Share the World," and it goes like this: The world is old, your world is new. The age you are was father too. He's traveled high, he's traveled low. He wonders now where you will go, what you will see, what he can show, what path you'll take before you know. That far from here and close at hand, adventure bring, you'll understand that what you find at far away can match discoveries when you stay. But this is truth that you must learn. Through travels far, it is your turn to choose a path that you can show adventures earned that helped you grow. Adventures that, when you are old, to your new son, they can be told. You've traveled high, you've traveled low. Come home soon so you can show your father where you have been too, and he can share the world with you. So, thank you. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed Trace Element. Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you, Ryan. Does anybody have any questions?
Right. Yeah, I'll take questions. We got a couple minutes before Tammy has to get out of the shop.
Yeah. They're going to leave me, I tell you.
Gotta say, Ryan, I loved the book.
Oh, thank you.
But I want to know if Candace is your unicorn.
She is. She is. It took a while to find her.
It was right in front of you all the time.
Right. She found me and set me straight.
It's very different reading a book when you know the family.
I imagine it's very different to be someone who's written a book and walk into Tammy's store and to see it. So I can relate.
One of the first things is like, even when you're talking about London and you're saying you wish your car was a race car, I was like, oh yeah.
Thanks.
And then all the references and, you know, the acronyms that you use going back to work, I'm going, oh my God. That's why I say you brought back a lot of memories.
Oh, well, I'm glad you feel that way. And it sounds like you're enjoying retirement then, if it brings back memories.
Gives me time to read the books.
That's great.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Ryan,
Thank you, Ryan.
I haven't read the book yet, Ryan, but I head to Peterborough tomorrow to pick it up.
Oh, fantastic.
And I love the poem.
Fantastic. You know, I may see you because I was going to go in to sign a couple of their copies tomorrow. So.
Yeah. Well, I'd love a signed copies, but I have connections with the rest of the Bell family. So I'm
all right.
Signed. But when you pulled up PJ O'Rourke, I said, I know he was the guest speaker at yours and Harv's graduation. And I remember when he said, get out of town. So kind of nice that you brought that in. And I've seen him floating around
here,
town.
bud.
You're right.
You've seen him. Well, thank him if you see him again.
I will.
I thought that was great.
Yeah. Anyway, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan, for the presentation. I had a quick question for your audience, really. How do you balance between a technological story and kind of not alienating your reader from maybe they don't have a background in the technical language that you're using?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not sure I did it well. I tried, Neil deGrasse Tyson is like my idol in that respect. Like, try to, convey something that's understandable to a large range of audience is difficult. So I would say I'm still learning. I don't know if you're coming from having read the book and you feel that way or not, but I think that was a challenge because I'm very interested in the tech, and I was really trying to accomplish, that goal of making sure I went deep enough on the technical side to satisfy my own interest, but that may challenge others. But I've heard from some that it really gave some texture, and it's not a long book, right? So every chapter is like 10 pages. So if you can make it through some of that, I think the story is pretty powerful and compelling without that understanding. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I think on the next story, I've taken that to heart and sprinkled the tech. It's just as deep, but it's in like 2-paragraph chunks throughout. So I think it gives folks a little breather. Any other questions? It looks like there's some folks I haven't seen in a while on there, so don't be shy to speak up.
Hey Ryan, this is Adam Connolly. How you doing?
Adam, how are you? This is actually going to be your book.
This is my hey, I got a book. Look at that. That's awesome. Hey, it's great to see everybody on here. For the folks that are kind of tuned in right now, Ryan and I also work at the same company. We actually went to the same high school, although maybe 7 years apart. I'm also from Peterborough, Conval graduate. So I'm just kind of tuned in to kind of, get a gist on this whole thing. I don't have the book yet, although I'm very excited for it to come in. So one of the questions that I have for you, Ryan, was, also having, experience in engineering in the defense industry, we oftentimes come across these almost engineering biases, right? Like there's these professors in college that tell us, engineers aren't writers and things like that. And I always took offense to that because I said, who are you to really say that, just because we're, involved in technology, that we're also not creative? And I do look at engineering as an art. And I also take pride in my writing. But I wanted to know, given the fact that you have such a diverse engineering background, did you face any of those biases when you were trying to write the book? Was anyone kind of, asking questions or maybe overly critical due to your background, or were there obstacles that you needed to overcome?
That's a great question and well stated, I might say. I think you're absolutely right. I think the countermeasure that I used to that was I didn't tell a lot of people I was writing. I wrote the old book with sort of having read it only myself and having it read back to me through that AI app. And it wasn't until really I shared it with Lee and a few others that anyone really read it. So it's really been through the whole process that I described with not much other eyes on it. And part of that is it was truly that, I wasn't sure how I was going to be received, but I just wanted to do it. Right. And in our community, I think it is pretty, it has been received very welcomely, but I think people are sort of stunned, maybe is the right word when you say that. And, I think it's kind of maybe, you may appreciate this and others don't, that like one of the other reasons to do it is to sort of recruit the next generation of engineers, right? And to give some credence to what you said, that there is a really interesting career in technology, and it's not just all books, right? And math.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I'll give the floor back to anyone else who wants to ask a question. I've got a few more, but I want to give some airtime to some of the other folks here.
Anyone else? I don't think I see the full list of folks here, so I can't prompt anyone who might be shy. I see Megan Rhodes on there, though.
Hi, Ryan Val. Congratulations.
Hey, how are you, Megan? Are you calling from like China? Where are you these days?
No, I'm in Colorado.
Oh, even
But
better.
Yeah, but we're really proud of you. We're really excited for you. Congratulations.
Thank you so much for tuning in.
It's
That's
awesome.
surreal.
Good for you.
Thanks.
Hey, Ryan.
Pat.
What's going on?
Pat,
So,
my wife and I. And in true Candace, desired form, we did it in our living room. It's just Pat and I and Candace and a couple witnesses. Thank you. All right.
Well, it's great. I just want to say, well, kind of on that note, I did give you a signature of mine, so I'm going to want an autograph on one of your books because I got you have my John Hancock on that wedding thing, whatever it's called. I guess my question is, I don't really have a question. Make sure you sign a lot of books because I'm out of town myself, and I'm going to have my dad come pick up a book at Toadstool probably tomorrow. So sign a couple extra.
I'll do it.
And I guess one question would be, do you have any current authors that you took inspiration from? I don't know if you addressed that, but like Andy Weir would be a guy who has a lot of engineering stuff going on in his books, and people eat that up. Artemis and whatever the Mars one was. Yeah. Any current authors you like?
Current authors, I gotta say Dan Brown is, maybe he's very mainstream, but gotta say him. I have this pack of old Life magazines that chronicle Ian Fleming's life. And Ian Fleming, maybe not a current author, but with the James Bond series being so popular, he's definitely like the man himself has always been intriguing to me. I think current authors aside, I would have to harken back to folks like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and people who are really skilled at that twist that I challenge myself to incorporate.
Great, I agree.
I have a couple comments. I don't have a question for you, Ryan, but the first comment or the first statement is R.W. Bell is a fantastic pen name.
I'll go with it.
That's the first. You didn't have to come up with a made up name, a pen, imaginary name. R.W. Bell sounds legit.
Thanks.
That's the first point. Second point is for a guy who's got a demanding career and a family, and I know is a busy guy even during a pandemic. It's really impressive that you pulled this all together and produced this. So that's the second piece. The last piece is my father always said that I'd be influenced by the company that I keep and the books that I read. And it would seem in this case that it would be the company that I keep and the books that they write. So really proud of you, man. Really well done. Very impressive. Love you, buddy.
Thanks. Means a lot coming from you. So thanks again, man. It's great. How we doing, Tammy? I don't want you to get,
I don't know if you noticed the lighting changed, but they've already turned the lights off on me, so.
Okay. I can't imagine we'll keep too much longer. I want to be respectful of other people's time as well, but do we have time for a couple more questions, or are you really?
Yeah, I thought someone had a couple more questions for you, so yeah, go ahead.
I must say, maybe to prompt another question, that the best part of writing for me is sharing it, which I've been longing to do. So I'll take questions all night, but we're not going to do that to Tammy. So you're welcome to write me at my website through the contact page there. The third installment is not written, so there's an opportunity to influence, I think. Although I do know the carrier wave, we've got to find the modulation for that story.
Okay, Ryan, since we have a few more seconds here, at least with Tammy, and being obviously respectful of everyone's time, let me actually get my video back. Okay. So you may have already touched upon this in pieces, but but as a general kind of statement, like what was the motivation behind deciding to write? I mean, I think you can appreciate perhaps more than anyone listening, you know, how kind of rare it is for engineers and technical experts to engage in an art such as writing. And I just kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on what exactly was your motivation behind writing Trace Element?
You know, I think I'd go back to maybe some of the concepts on this chart, but to give you sort of a new answer, you know, I felt like the you know, the one thing, like when I watch a you know, a sci-fi movie like you know, let's just say Star Wars, everyone knows that, and an X-wing comes in and just hovers and lands, and you look at it and you're like, there's no thrusters that are coming down. Like, how is that working? It's just the opportunity to really like explain for someone that, you know, there's real science out there that's just as exciting as the fantastic, right? And some of it's even more amazing when you know that it's real. But that was one thing. The other part of the question, I think, is, you know, in my role as an engineering lead, right, I have to be very articulate and, you know, and maybe, you know, not to motivational in a way, right? And so one of the reasons that, you know, I wanted to try to write a story is that I think I put a lot of that into practice on a regular basis for the company. And I wanted to see if, you know, if I put those skills to, you know, this sort of endeavor, how would it translate, right? And like I said before, Neil deGrasse Tyson is another, you know, inspiration of mine. And if I could be so articulate as to give a complex, you know, topic the credence to be well understood by anyone, I think, you know, that was really something I wanted to challenge myself to do.
Great.
You got another question, you said?
Yeah, and it was when you sort of hinted at let's see here if I'm referencing my notes. I actually took notes on this whole thing.
All right.
So yeah, you and Lee may be able to chime in here a little bit if he's still on the call, but so you mentioned that Lee helped edit, but when he was finished reading, he mentioned that kind of curiosity about what happens to these characters after the story. Now, was that so early in the editing process that curiosity actually kind of got some legs and was entered into Trace Element, or is that something more that we can experience maybe on the Coral Sea, or what was it, the Shadow of the Sun and the Mystery of the Coral
Shadow
Sea?
on the. That's a great question. Very insightful. So the story in the technology and the story in that next book is another story that I wanted to tell, but I was sort of cautious about putting it on paper because of the work that we do. And so another part of the process that I didn't really touch on is that, you know, in order to publish when you have a top secret clearance, you have to get the government to approve, like security at our business, and then the government on the other side to approve it. Just like if you were a special ops guy who's retired and needed to write about a mission, you know, like, there's the little man. I had that idea on paper in the last couple of years and submitted the manuscript after hearing Lee's intro. I kind of wrapped it up during the pandemic, really, and sent it in. And I think the first story kind of paved the way for the second story, and the approval process took a lot less time. And the government said, no, it's okay to write it. And so it's done, and it could be published, but it all depends on the success of Trace Element, I think. That's Ethan. Share the world, buddy. Yes.
Awesome. Well, that's great, man. And that was an excellent poem. That was really impressive. And I can see before me the inspiration.
The first one is easy, but the second one is not a lot of stuff in my bouncy line. You can't take the bouncy line off. That's down there from a super dodger. It's only for like when we're going overboard.
I understand. It's hard to do the second one. Yeah. So thank you, Adam, for your questions and very articulate. Appreciate it.
Of course, congratulations.
So with that, are there any other comments or questions that that folks are interested in? Maybe from someone who's read it and had a piece of intrigue they wanted answered. Wrap up with that.
We just wanted to say well done. We're very proud of you, Ryan. Your
Yes,
family
sir.
over here.
Oh,
Congratulations, Uncle Ryan.
Yeah.
thank you.
Very
That's
cool.
my sister and
And the
Natalie,
birthday girl.
my niece. Birthday's tomorrow. Thank you guys.
Hello, Ethan.
Ryan, one quick question. What does the EV3 come from?
Ah, what a great question to end this on. EV3, so there's two answers. The setting for EV3 is based on a real place called E2V, which is now Teledyne, and it exists in Chelmsford, England, right in the same location.
Okay.
But EV3 is purposely undefined in this story because it gets defined in the later parts of the trilogy.
Okay.
But it's intentionally meant to be an acronym with 3 E's and 1 V.
Gotcha. One of the few things that came up blank on Google.
Yeah. Oh, well, she must have done her homework there.
I did plenty of homework.
I will say that I had a thought that I would write EV3 and somehow have an L in it so that it would say like evil, but it never really panned out that way.
The homework that I did from it was the travel in London, where you talked about, your Gordon Steakhouse, and then you talked about all the places that you took me for a journey. You took me for a walk. You say you can't do a travel journal. I totally disagree. I loved walking with you. I won't give the story away, but yeah.
I think the Monaco scene is really vivid for that. Interestingly, the International Atomic Energy Agency really does have a building right there on the harbor, and they do that kind of work right there in Monaco. And then, of course, the Anish Kapoor art thread is true. That mirror, that sky mirror, is also right there in front of the Monte Carlo, which is a neat connection back to Anish Kapoor's work here in the ARCELOR Metal Tower, and other things that he's done in the world, like the bean in Chicago. You might be familiar with. It's all reflections, light and dark, and kind of mezzanine beams in physical form. So, well, this is COVID, living in quarantine.
Entertainment here tonight.
I was afraid you might be stage fright shy, but I guess that was unfounded.
Tammy, I was hoping to swing by the Toadstool in like 6 or 7 hours to pick up a couple more copies. Are you going to be there?
No, I'm not here till Monday.
I'm going to hit the road in like 4 or 5 hours. So if you could just hang tight, that'd be great. Appreciate it.
All right. I think Lee tells it how it is. We're probably timing out everyone, and you might want to get back to watching Cobra Kai or whatever you're binging lately.
Thanks a lot for your time, Ryan. I really appreciate you hanging around, Tammy. This was great. Thank you.
Oh, it was great for me too, and I appreciate you calling in. And we can certainly talk more maybe when he's asleep.
Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Tammy.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you. Congratulations again. Very proud of you.
Well done, buddy.
Thank you guys. Say goodbye. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you for
Bye.
See ya.
I waved to your uncle.
I think you have the off button, Tammy.
All right, I'm just going to end it. Everybody good?
Tammy, I'll be
Bye.
there. See you in a little bit.
Thank you. See you in a little bit. Right on.